It was a skyless world in which his eye, through dim gulfs of shadowy air, saw only ever-mounting slopes, great walls of stone behind great walls, and frowning precipices wreathed with mist. He sat for a moment, half dreaming, listening to the noise of water, the whisper of dark trees, the crack of stone, and the vast waiting silence that brooded behind all sound. He loved mountains, or he had loved the thought of them marching on the edge of stories brought from far away, but now he was borne down by the insupportable weight of Middle-earth.
I have crafted a fully custom Lord of the Rings Catan set to celebrate the upcoming 30th anniversary of Catan, the 70th anniversary of the Fellowship of the Ring, and more importantly, the 40th birthday of my best friend and longest gaming partner, Mark. A friend who is absolutely obsessed with Lord of the Rings, who was there with me when I discovered this classic game with this exact copy more than 20 years ago. So a custom Lord of the Rings Catan set just felt like the right gift. And when I say fully customized, I mean completely from scratch. Custom designed cards, player tokens, personally sculpted and painted tiles, number tokens, and of course, the best anti-hero in any story ever written, Gollum, who will be playing the part of the robber. But speaking of stories, I think we're telling this one completely out of order. I want to take you on this journey through this entire process of creating this set. So let's start where all good stories start, at the beginning. So let's start this journey with the playing cards using Catan. Now, naturally, I could just give him the cards from the base set and sort of just be done with it, but that wouldn't be very fun, and it certainly wouldn't be very Lord of the Rings. I think the best thing we can do is more or less start the design process from scratch, whip up something in Photoshop that we can be happy with, and that fits the theme of the set. Thankfully, I'm already done, but I'm just gonna give you a really brief overview of my general process so that we can get rid of these, I think. Actually, this process isn't dissimilar to how I designed my Glory to Rome set, which I made publicly available if you're interested. You just gotta go to the video and you'll find the link in the description. Whenever I'm designing cards, I start with a canvas size of 822 by 1122. And I always use the template provided by the site Printer Studio. That's the site I print my cards at, which lets me know the bleed and cut areas of my design. Bleed just means the area that likely won't get printed, but should have something in there just in case. First, I like to start with the border. I'd love to say I drew this one myself, but I actually just pulled it from a vector image online, and I just love the look that I used in most of the cards. Once I have my border, I'll usually place some sort of image in the background that I'm only going to use as a texture for the card. You'll see what I mean in a second. I usually like to go with some sort of old papyrus look. That texture will also create some consistency across all the cards when I start using different types of art. After getting the texture I want, I'll need card art for the main image. Now I think I'll just show you one of the resource cards here, and for that I use Midjourney to get some pretty cool mountains. AI images work pretty well when it comes to landscapes because there are no human fingers to completely mess up and create sort of like dimensional reality warping nightmare fueling monstrosities. For the prompt, you usually want to be consistent when generating images. So for the mountain, I'll tell it I want an oil painting and the image style should mimic James Gurney with large brushstrokes. That's the man behind Dinotopia, which is a very, very pretty book series. It won't mimic his style one-to-one, but it will again create some consistency across designs. Now I simply save the image and I plop it down on my card. Do you see what a difference the texture background makes when I reduce the transparency of this image? It's like magic. Next, I need the ore resource, which I think it might be best to use Midjourney again for that. I might have some difficulties finding illustrations of these various resource types online. Again, it's all about consistency, so I'm using similar prompts. But we're noir style this time because we want to be classy. I also just kind of like using these sort of impressionist style types. Then once it's on the card, I give it a nice glow effect so it pops a bit more from the background. And essentially all the cards were designed like that, but the great thing is that most of the art is just coming straight from some of the best fan art you have ever seen for Lord of the Rings, and there are just a ton out there. People obviously love Lord of the Rings. And here are the rest of the resource cards. I think they turned out really cool, and I'm pretty happy with the results. You can see for the soldier cards, I wanted each one to be different and sort of feature a different creature or character from the books. For the victory point cards, I wanted them to be different regions in Middle-earth that had some really impactful significance. All right, no more graphic design. Let's move on to the painting and start with the robber piece. Who better to represent the robber than the misunderstood, but still wonderfully devious, Gollum? We'll start with a fairly dark flesh color and just sort of build up from here and use this as a nice foundation. Always try to use a darker foundation rather than using your base color if your base color is lighter. It'll just save you a ton of time. Now to get a pale flesh, I mix light skin and pale skin till I get the result I want. And then I start applying fairly thin layers of paint to try not to obscure too much detail. Miniature painting is all about finding the amount of time to spend on each miniature you paint that best fits your needs. You know, if you don't have time to spend hours and hours, then just don't and be happy with that. Just do your best and be happy with the results, while also wanting to find a way to improve for the next time. So I think we'll just skip ahead here to the finished base coat. For the shadows, you can't go wrong with Reikland Flesh Shade. It's, I think, one of the only Games Workshop bottles I own, but it's so damn good when you want to get like a fleshy shadows down quickly. Once our wash is dried, we can start bringing back the base color. The robber in Catan is such an integral piece of the game because, in my opinion, it's one of the things that separates it from a lot of other contemporary Euro games at the time by providing some like super great in-your-face interaction. My friends and I always loved that interaction, how the game balanced that sort of fine line between helping temporary allies through, you know, trading and making enemies with just this simple robber piece. Don't be afraid to make mistakes when miniature painting. You know, if you feel your highlights look a little chalky, just glaze over them with a very thin layer of your base color. It'll soften your transition between colors and help you return to your base color if you just go a little too far with the shadows or the highlights. For highlights, just remember to brighten the areas of the model that are closest to the light source. So raise edges on a muscle, for example. And always remember that the only point where you should be adding white to your highlights is at the very end of the process. If you keep adding white to your base color to get it lighter, you're just going to lose vibrancy in your color and it's going to look really drab at the end. So always try to use other colors to brighten it up. For the eyes, we're going to darken up the sockets first. Once we're done that, we'll go with a nice off-white. I'd love to give some eye tips here, but his eyes are so gigantic that they're really easy to paint. Like everything else, we're just building up lighter and lighter layers. Once we're done, we'll try not to completely mess this up and place his pupils down so it looks like he's sort of gazing at the ring. We want these nice and tiny dilated pupils that are sort of dilated from the glow and wonder emanating from the ring. The ring, of course, being the corruptible element that not only prolongs Smeagol's life so that he can live well over 500 years, but also was a symbol of his treachery and murder of Deagle. For his hair, we'll use some diluted black and just sort of freestyle where his wispy hair should be. It's a little dark in some areas, so I'll just come in later with the base color of his flesh and sort of just tone it down. For the rock, we'll paint it like you'd paint any rock, and then give it a nice black wash. And then once that wash dries, we'll come in and start dry brushing with a lighter color. Once we're all done, we get to do the most satisfying part of any paint job and paint the base pure black. It always feels good doing this, and I have no idea why. I guess it gives you a sense of closure and completion.
Deep down here by the dark water lived old Gollum, a small, slimy creature. I don't know where he came from, nor who or what he was.
Now, before we start painting all of those tiles, let's take a look at the extra bits themselves. I'm talking about the number tiles, the dice, the hexes the tiles fit into, the player pieces. Now, of course, We could have just easily bought all of these things. But again, I want the entire gift to be homemade so that it feels more like it comes from the heart, you know? The number tokens are relatively simple. I quickly designed them using Meshmixer and then painted them black. I sort of like the black tile with the white font rather than the white tile that you see in most Catan games. I think the black just kind of looks classier and detracts a lot less from the tiles themselves, which I know are going to look good. For the dice, I was considering just buying Lord of the Rings themed dice and just sort of getting elvish characters on them, but then I realized only me and Mark would be able to play that, and that's no good. So instead I just pilfered some pretty dice from my Dungeons & Dragons sets, which I think will go nicely. For the player pieces, they're a combination of objects I found online and of a lot of 3D model editing to just sort of make them perfect. Player 1 will be Rivendell. No other color best represents Rivendell than green, since that's their banner. I wanted the roads to look like fancy bridges going over water, and the settlements and city pieces to sort of perfectly represent the beautiful and elegant architecture of Rivendell. Player 2 is Gondor. Gondor had to be blue, not just because of the banners of Dol Marath, but because of the influence of the founding exiles of Numenor, who settled in the south of Middle-earth to form Gondor, and who wore blue as their color. And of course, their structures perfectly capture Norman-inspired architecture with grand castles, quaint villages, and impenetrable walls of stone. For player 3, we have Rohan. Those who occupied the Ridermark were more than military cavalrymen. They were also great farmers, so I went with yellow to represent large open wheat fields and made their structures to represent Scandinavian and sort of Anglo-Saxon buildings, which they largely draw their influence from. And finally, player 4 will be the dwarves, represented by red to best represent their fiery passion for buildings and battle. And no, I'm just kidding. Red is just the only color I had left. For the dwarves, I wanted their structures, both their bridges and settlements, to be sort of square and practical like their bodies, and of course their cities to be the doors of Durin, leading to the great dwarven city of Khazad-dûm. And the last bit we completed were the hexes. For the hexes, each tile needs to fit in the hex that I also designed in Meshmixer. We want the roads and other player pieces to perfectly slot into these holes and between the tiles themselves. We also need to buy a ton of magnets so that they can all stick together like so. This is going to make setup way easier. But I think it's time we get to work on the tiles that are actually going to go in these things and move away from the sort of peripheral pieces. It's time for the main event, the tiles. I'm going to walk you through the design and sculpting process just briefly to show you how I print the tiles, and then move on to painting, where I'll share with you some tips on how I paint terrain pieces. For many of the tiles, I'll be using a heavily modified version of the beautiful tiles done by Graven Guild, and then combining those with various Lord of the Rings sculpted elements I find online from a bunch of different sources. And then just sort of like cobbling them all together and combining them into some sort of like beautiful Frankenstein-like tile monster. Rather than go through the sculpting process of every single tile, I'm going to show you how I made the Shire, because most of the basic principles used in this sculpt were replicated across the entire project. And honestly, the Shire seems like the perfectly fitting place to start our tile journey. So we're going to use this awesome tile from Graven Guild that I think is supposed to be a dungeon entrance or something, but just looking at it, you can see how we can make this a pretty cool hobbit village. I found these awesome hobbit doors that are just way too big. So we'll obviously have to shrink these down by using the transform tool. Once we have the size we want, we can position the door to our desired location using transform controls, which can be a little finicky at first, but over time you sort of get the hang of it. Once we place the door in a good location, we need to remove the hill parts that are sort of obscuring the door. To do that, we use the pinch tool. You can see how it functions as I sort of like pinch away the extra bits of the hill so that the door starts to reveal itself over time. It's actually pretty damn satisfying to use. Naturally, none of them are going to fit perfectly. However, all we have to do is select the sculpt tool, select the brush style that best fits our purpose. Here we're creating hills, so a rounded edge is best. Then we simply increase the areas on the model to make them fit. We can also adjust the size, strength, and depth of the tool. Strength refers to the severity of our desired effect, which in this case is inflate. We want to make small adjustments here, so we'll stick to low strength and size. It's really important that every tile we create represent an important element from the book. We want the Catan set to just be absolutely oozing theme. The Shire just makes perfect sense for the setting that we're trying to establish. The Shire was actually purposely kept modest to make it unattractive to invaders during the reign of King Argleb II. which makes it the perfect place for sheep herding. But don't let that conflict avoidance fool you, okay? The hobbits were not cowards. They provided support for troops in the great battle against Angmar, the land of the Witch King. We'll just be doing the exact same sculpting process all over the model and importing new hobbit doors into the sides of these hills. Now once we're done all our basic sculpting, we'll start plopping our sheep objects down. We'll be taking our sheep from another one of Graven Guild's tiles. For this tile, he has two types of sheep. He's got standing around looking at nothing guy and head in the ground guy. We'll just take both for variety's sake. Just click the select tool and start highlighting the object we want to remove. It's okay if we end up selecting a bit of the land underneath them, it won't really matter. Also, I know that the scale here of the sheep is it's way off. I mean, these are huge, huge sheep. But we need things to be readable on the table, so we'll have to abandon realism, unfortunately, in this one instance. Although hobbits are small, who's to say how big a sheep looks when standing next to a hobbit? Once we're happy with the selection, we click Edit, and then we click Separate. This removes the sheep from the original tile. When we place it down, we want to do our best to level it and make sure it's actually touching the tiles. It's okay if his feet go into the tile because the scale here is so small that you're not going to notice it. Now we can simply copy and paste this sheep and put him somewhere else. We'll just keep doing this process over and over again until we're happy with the amount of sheep that we have in the tile. Once we're happy with the final results, we'll add the section where we'll be placing our number token. Now thankfully we already have the dimensions since we've already printed them out. So to get that spot done, we just need to create a large cylinder using the Meshmix tool, entering the right size, and then inserting into the location we want. We'll put it right at the top of the hill. Once finished, we'll select the model and the cylinder and select Boolean difference, which leaves an imprint of the cylinder in the model. Once everything is cleaned up, this is the end result. Like I said before, this is my absolute favorite tile. I'm really happy with the results, and I think it really does capture the Shire perfectly. It has this sort of like pristine and wholesome vibe to it. And I made all the sheep tiles like that. I wanted them to look sort of like pastoral and quaint. I think the whole fun part of this process was just sort of planning it out and deciding, what area of Middle Earth best fits what resource type in Catan. Like every tile I feel needs to have a thematic purpose. It needs to tell a story. For the brick tiles, I wanted them to be associated with Mordor and a sort of like desolation of Middle Earth through corruption and industrialization. For the wheat tiles, I had to go with Rohan and the sort of small hamlets that occupy the rider mark to represent the sort of wide open spaces that allow for the riders of Rohirrim to run free. For the mountains, I wanted to represent both Gondor and the dwarves. Both of the iconic fortresses of Gondor are built into the rock surface, so they're, in my opinion, the perfect fit for an ore tile. Now for the wood tiles, I had to display my favorite forest of Middle Earth and just throw in Rivendell because it was, when I found it online, it was an absolute beautiful sculpt that I had to put a ton of work in. That sculpt cost me the most amount of hours in this entire process. For the sea, I had a lot of tiles to make, but I love the idea of placing sort of famous port towns around the board, complete with occupying merchant ships, sort of like, delivering their specialized goods. And for the generic sea tiles themselves, I obviously wanted a nice mixture of various famous oceans and landmarks found only when sailing across Middle Earth. Every tile has to serve a thematic purpose and sort of tell a story, because stories are the reason we play games in the first place. It's what my top 100 list was all about. Hell, it's exactly what this hobby is all about. Some of the best memories of my life involve board games, and I'm happy to be sharing this hobby both with my friends and with you watching. And soon, I'll be sharing this project with my best friend, Mark. Seriously, he's going to love this thing, and I hope he gives a really good reaction on camera because I'm excited to show it to him. But before we get to that part, we need to get these things printed. Now, unfortunately, we have 39 tiles we need to print, and each tile takes anywhere from 3 to 6 hours depending on its size. So instead of showing you each individual tile being printed, I think it best we just speed through this and montage this shit. So all 37 tiles are finally done. It took about 80 hours of printing, I think, and about 1.5 kilograms of resin. So I'm going to walk you through the rest of the process. I'm going to remove this lid here, and I'm going to show you what I had to do for every single tile. So it looks like everything turned out perfectly, And I think I'm dripping resin on the floor, so don't tell Kim, because she would kill me. So what we're gonna do now is we're essentially just gonna remove the supports from the thing we printed. And to do that, I generally just kind of rip them off. I rip them off, and then I put them in the dunk, which is basically just alcohol. And I, of course, am wearing gloves because you do not want this stuff on your fingers. I have done it before, and the very next day, my fingers were essentially tingling for about a day and a half. So hopefully, you know, I'm not poisoning myself. Oh, and that's the last one. Look at this one. That is incredibly cool. I mean, it's a little tough to see because it's all coated in slimy resin. But once we wash this off, I'm really excited. If I can't even fathom what it'd be like to travel back in time and tell my 12-year-old self that all the gaming pieces that I'm using and having fun with would one day be something that I could print myself and print a better version of. My mind would be blown. And just the fact that I can make something so incredibly cool, like the nostalgia factor I'm getting from seeing this little miniature version of Helm's Deep, a battle scene, one of the best battle scenes in cinematic history that Mark and I have watched dozens of times together. And now finally, it's all coming together and he's gonna be able to see this little miniature version of Middle-earth on the board and play Catan, one of our favorite board games together. I'm super psyched. So we're gonna get this washed and I'm gonna stop dripping all over the floor and I'm gonna clean everything up. So once this is all complete, I'm gonna take it out of the alcohol for about 15 to 20 minutes and let it dry, and then we can cure it in the exact same station. We'll set it to about 4 minutes, let's say. We'll let it do its magic. Wow. Securing the model is, of course, one of the most important steps in the process because we wanna make sure that the piece is nice and durable when it's getting played. Plus, we don't want to make his entire family sick with dripping resin because I just don't think that'd be a very good birthday present. All the models have now been completely cured and are safe to touch. I am super happy with how all these turned out. The detail in a lot of these sculpts is just, it's breathtaking. It's breathtaking. Look, that's Rivendell. You could see like all the trees and like the little windows and stuff. This is gonna be really hard to paint. It's just dawning on me now, like looking at all these tiles. This is gonna be very overwhelming. But we have less than, I think maybe 2 weeks left. So we're gonna bunker down and just paint the living hell out of all of these little models. So before we start the painting process, we kind of have to prime these models because you don't want to put paint on an unprimed model. And because I value the health and safety of my dog and Kim, it's probably better we do this outside. It doesn't matter what color you use. You can use white, gray, black. I'm using gray because it's kind of neutral. You just shake it up, take the lid off, and press the little nozzle. That's it. That's all there is to it. So let's get started. And we are done. For the mountain tiles, we'll start with Helm's Deep, my favorite fortress in Lord of the Rings. Minas Tirith be damned. When Gondor was at the height of its power, the Numenorian Sea Kings built this awesome fortress, which they originally called the Fortress of Aglarond. And thankfully, we've already paid our tribute to the Numenorians in this set with one of our water tiles, which we're gonna paint later on. I know painting gray seems horribly redundant on gray prime, but I find dark washes work better on acrylic paint instead of over the resin of the primer. Don't worry too much about painting base coats with like really intricate precision, okay? This is a big old castle, so you just go nuts, get a little sloppy if it saves your time. For the paint itself, I'm actually just using this like super crappy dollar store paints. Like when it comes to terrain, like unless you're balling out of control and you're a millionaire, don't use model paint. You will go poor, you'll go broke. And in this economy, nobody can afford model paint on giant scale terrain pieces. I know a lot of these are not strictly mountain tiles, but I'll be doing most of the entire tile gray so that they read or tile when you're playing the game. I just had to find a way to incorporate the castles of Middle-earth into Catan as much as possible. Plus, these fortresses in the novels were built into mountains. Helm's Deep, for example, is built into the surface of the glittering caves of Aglarond, which is its namesake. See? So now the tiles make perfect thematic sense. For the surrounding earth, we'll just go with a muddy brown. It's going on fairly watery because, like I said, it's pretty crappy paint, but that's okay. We'll just do a few more layers. Helm's Deep always reminds me of the time really early in Mark and I's friendship where we'd play the hell out of that, I don't know if you remember this, that old Two Towers game on GameCube
we'd get stuck. Oh, we get stuck on this damn level. I think it was just called Helm's Deep. It was like the Helm's Deep mission. And every single time we would rage quit. I just got like this rush of nostalgia while I was painting this. And once we have the base coat all done, we'll move on to the wash. So once the wash is dry, we'll start dry brushing. And again, we're just building up layers here and using downward strokes. Also, make sure to use a crappy brush. Although unfortunately, I do have fancy Raphael brushes that I use to dry brush, but only when I want to flex on people, okay? It's like driving a Porsche and using it in a demolition derby. You know, you just want to let people know that you can and that you're very bad with money. As the dry brush continues, I'll just keep using lighter paint till I achieve the results I want. For the ground, I'm doing a very splotchy stippling effect with lighter colors. You know, nothing particularly fancy. I want it to look rugged and sort of messy on the base. And once I'm done some of these details, I start darkening some other areas with watered down black paint. When painting models, you really want high contrast, but not so much where it looks like a cartoon character. I've also just realized that an all gray model will be boring. So let's get some green on a few of these walls. Is this particularly realistic growth? I don't know, who cares? I'm not a biologist. You know, we're shooting for the rule of cool here, people. That's all I care about. And I'll do the same with brown decoloration as well. You know, just sort of mix things up. And I'll be doing that exact same technique on the other two mountain/castle tiles. So let's skip all that and just see the end results.
Eastward the dawn rose, ridge behind ridge into the morning, and vanished out of eyesight into guess. It was no more than a glimmer blending with the hem of the sky, but it spoke to them out of the memory and old tales of the high and distant mountains.
Here we have Weathertop sitting on the highest point of Weather Hills in Eriador, a site of great strategic importance because it overlooked the region. In the film, Aragorn uses it to spot the ring race approaching in the distance, and it's also where Frodo got his ass stabbed for being a very silly little hobbit. Now we've already gone ahead and base coated the tile green. Now I'll start stippling lighter shades of green and start just building up layers. The perspective of the tile is a sort of bird's eye view, and so the scale here is really small, so the details in the grass are just gonna look like, well, they're gonna look like blotches of color. Now there are two ways to achieve this effect. You know, I'm using a crappy brush with all the bristles sort of splayed out, but you can also use a sponge to achieve similar results. So you see I'm getting lighter as I build, and the end result will look something like this. Sadly, the entire time I paint these sheet tiles, I'm sort of making that joke that I'm sure every single person who has ever played Catan knows about. You know, don't be coy, you know exactly what I'm talking about. Got wood for sheep? It couldn't have been just us that took that dumb little joke and just like freaking ran it into the ground every time we played. Even after splotching the paint all over the place with each tile, I will come in with a brush and sort of accentuate certain portions of the model with a bit more precision. The tower wasn't always the ruins you see here though. The watchtower was attacked and burned to the ground by the Witch King, and by the time of the Great War of the Ring, which was centuries later, only the ring of broken stonework remained and the structure's importance sort of faded into obscurity. For the sheep and the ruins of the tower, we'll start with a base of gray. Once we're done, we'll give the ruins a quick and dirty dry brush. The sheep tiles are my absolute favorite to paint. I think they all just like turned out really, really well.
Look at last on meadows green, and trees and hills they long have known. The road goes ever on and on, down from the door where it began. Now far ahead the road has gone, and I must follow if I can, pursuing it with eager feet, until it joins some larger way, where many paths and errands meet.
For Isengard, we were taking some liberties here. I want the tower to be in a brick-like area, which I think best captures the feel of the environment. Even though prior to Isengard's corruption, it was actually really green and beautiful. But now I feel the brick landscape best embodies that sort of desolation and toil befitting the domain of Sormal. Now, normally I would never apply this much wash on a miniature, but because we're dealing with a fairly large terrain piece, I think it's okay. I want to darken up the entire piece as much as possible anyway. And besides, Orthanc has not seen this much water since the Ents flooded Isengard. Even the Ents couldn't take down this tower. When they were gifted the area to govern by King Elisar, they tried to bring it down, but it sort of harmed them whenever they touched it. So instead, the forest became known as the Treegarth of Orthanc. Normally, I'm not a big fan of dry brushing because you don't have as much control, but on a big piece like this, that's mostly hard edge rocks, it will look far more natural. Plus, I get to use the makeup brush that I stole from Kim. We're just going to keep building up layers of highlight and then likely tone it down with a light wash to sort of bring back the vibrancy of the tile. The difficulty is that when you use too much white or too much black, you end up removing the color. Okay, I think the brick tiles are done, and I think they're all looking nice and menacing.
We go, we go, we go to war, to hew the stone and break the door. For bowl and bough are burning now, the furnace roars, we go to war. To land of gloom with tramp of doom, with roll of drum we come, we come. To Isengard with doom we come.
For the wheat tiles, I want all of them to sort of represent Rohan, even though I know Rohan was mostly, tall grasslands, more so than wheat fields, but there were famous herdsmen and farmers. So each tile would sort of represent a different village or city of the Rider Mark, the land of the riders. Oh, and wheat, lots and lots of wheat. So here's a shocker, we are starting with base coating. Although I'm putting down green, I'll be adding a lot of yellow into the grass. Once again, using a very crabby brush and doing the stabby technique. For the wheat fields themselves, we'll start with a base of brown. Yellow is tough to paint, much like white, it takes a lot of layers. But if you start with a base coat of brown, first of all, it looks better, and it's just easier on you. Once the base is done, we'll start making lighter gradient lines along the fields. This will make them stand out more and read a little easier as a yellow tile when it's on the table. Plus, that's what a lot of wheat fields sort of look like when you have a bird's eye view of them. We'll just keep building layers and layers and getting brighter each time. This tile is supposed to represent Underharrow, which was a small hamlet on the banks of the Snowbourn River located in Rohan. The only reference we get in the books to the village is a sort of passage about all the women standing outside of their homes as the men sort of left during the War of the Ring, knowing very well that they likely would never return to harvest the fields. I did a tiny bit of work here off camera, so forgive me, but basically just added a few more details and painted the disc spot black. We also did the path, which will now just darken a bit with a wash, and then we'll start adding a bit of dirt and surrounding grassy fields, because we don't want this tile to ever be mistaken for our other green tiles, which are forest and our pasture tiles. From here, I'm just taking a smaller brush and adding more details, whether it's cobblestones or the extra structures. All the Rohan wheat tiles look pretty similar, so let's just skip ahead and take a look at the finished product.
Through Rohan, over fen and field, where the long grass grows, the west wind goes walking, and about the walls it goes. What news from the west, O wandering wind, do you bring to me tonight?
To base coat the wooded tiles, we will give it a nice sloppy dark green. Since the sheep tiles are also green, we need to do our best to sort of darken these tiles as much as possible so that when they're playing the game, they visually read on the table as forest tiles. Now, obviously there's a scale issue here since ends are the size of regular trees, but of course that wouldn't stand out as well, so we have to make them pretty gigantic. You'll also notice that the brushes I use, they're pretty crappy. We're actually really crappy. I do have those like designer expensive brushes, but I just rarely use them. You know, content creators push expensive brushes all the time, and honestly, a lot of times you just don't need them, and they're largely just a waste of money. But that's a different topic altogether. For the ends, I've just applied a simple dark wash, and now I'm just highlighting very loosely. And again, I'll subdue my jarring brightness I get here and there with just a brown glaze. Glazes really are a miracle to work with. They just make everything a lot easier. I think this tile looks pretty good. I'm actually pretty happy with all the woodland tiles and how they turned out.
When summer lies upon the world, and in a noon of gold, beneath the roof of sleeping leaves, the dreams of trees unfold. When woodland halls are green and cool, and wind is in the west, come back to me, and say my land is best.
Now it's time to paint the sea tiles, and we have a lot of them. But thankfully, we learned the dark secrets of Warhammer Army batch painting, where you essentially just line up everything and you go to each tile color by color. It's tedious as all hell, but man, it just gets it done. Let's speed up this part because it's fairly boring, and I think you get the idea of base coating by now. For the highlights, I'm going to go with a light dry brushing of a lighter blue on each of the tiles. Building up to pure white here to show like the sea foam, and I'm just abandoning the dry brush technique for now and opting to use a regular brush for just maximum control. Now that we have all the water finished, we can start working on the larger details on each of these tiles, like these bad boys right here. I always loved the Argonath because unlike the Colossus of Rhodes that probably inspired Tolkien, these were not built as a celebration of victory, but rather as like a warning to the enemies of Gondor that, you know, while we raise our hand in welcome, our sword is always ready to strike you down if you mean us harm. Fairly ominous, but relatively stern message to newcomers. For the land surrounding the Pillars of Kings, we're doing the usual splotchy brown stippling with some lighter dry brushing. And we'll be applying similar colors to the boat. It looks like crap right now, but I'm sure you figured this out that we're just gonna glaze over all this with the base color. It's gonna look much better, much smoother. You always kind of have to trust the process when painting because sometimes things just don't look very good in the early stages. On the statues themselves, obviously we're destroying more brushes with cheap paint and rough haphazard, dry brushing. I don't know about all of you, but for us, every game of Catan involved us rushing to build settlements next to ports because you can damn well bet that the time was coming where like nobody would trade with one another. And so the ports sort of allowed us to get what we wanted without actually engaging with friends. We want to hurt one another, not help one another. That's what friends are for. The painting process is nothing you haven't seen before, so let's just skip ahead because I'm pretty excited to show them to you and finally have this project be done and gifted to Mark.
To the sea, the white gulls are crying. The wind is blowing and the white foam is flying. West, west away, the round sun is falling. Grey ship, do you hear them calling? The voices of my people that have gone before me. I will leave the woods that bore me. For our days are ending and our years failing. I will pass the wide waters lonely sailing. Long are the waves on the last shore falling. Sweet are the voices in the lost isle calling. In Erisea, in Elvenhold that no man can discover, where the leaves fall not, land of my people forever.
And we're almost done, and I couldn't think of a better tile to save for last than our desert tile, Barad-dûr. Now off camera I painted the towers just sort of all black to fit the description in the books. For the earth surrounding the towers, we'll be doing our usual brown base coat with a dry brush. I've said this a few times before, but it bears repeating. When you're dry brushing terrain, don't be afraid to get messy and get paint on places you don't want it to get. It's just not a big deal, especially here. You know, we'll just go back over those areas with the same base color. Moving on to the tower itself, when you're dealing with a black object with a lot of raised edges, your best bet for highlighting is a technique known as edge highlighting. You essentially just softly brush the edges of the miniature with a lighter color. Because our base is black, we'll be adding tiny amounts of blue with each layer of our highlighting getting smaller and smaller as we build up. It's important we spend some time with this building because it's one of the most important structures, the most iconic structures in Middle-earth. It was the siege of 3434 when the last alliance entered Mordor and surrounded the orcs at the foot of the tower. The alliance sieged the Great Tower and brought down Sauron, which marked the beginning of the Third Age and sadly the survival of Sauron, since Isildur refused to destroy the One Ring when he had the chance, and we all remember that scene from the movies. You have to be really careful here when highlighting black. If you go too far, you'll end up having the piece not really look black anymore. If that happens, it's not really a big deal because you can just use a black glaze to bring the color back down. Now for the eye, we'll start with a base of red and just sort of build up to yellow in certain sections, primarily the center. We want it to look as though most of the heat is coming from the center of the eye. We'll also be doing the same thing with each of these openings. I think it'll look better if we can get as much color in here as possible. It will create a sort of like cool looking contrast. Game-wise, I have always liked the desert piece in Catan. I know that sounds strange, but we always found that its location popping up in sort of like different spots during setup always set how the game would flow and where people would be building. One of the reasons Catan is so great is just how variable it is. Every game sort of plays a little differently. For around the eye, we'll do a very slight object source lighting technique, which essentially just means you're just glazing the area of color of the glow over the area surrounding the source of the light. There really isn't much more to this piece than that, and it was pretty easy to paint. So let's just show the end result now, and then we'll just be done with painting. We can get on to the good stuff, which is showing this thing to Mark.
Barad-dûr, the Dark Tower, which suffered no rival and laughed at flattery, biding its time, secure in its pride and its immeasurable strength.
But we are not done this video just yet, so don't click away, just because I thought it would be a really great idea to sort of drive down to Mark's house and surprise him with this gift, and then just play around. You want to see this board in action, don't you? Let's go.
Okay, there's been a bit of change of plans. We're not going to his house. He's coming here. Everything's already set up. Camerawoman, she's showing the board. Okay, we're gonna go say hello. He's been waiting at the door a long time already. We can make him wait. He's not that important of a guest. Go sit. Hey, come on in. Why do you have a tripod? We got you a gift. Happy birthday. Come see the gift.
Oh shit.
Yeah.
Nice.
Lord of the Rings. All the cards are all custom. And these cards are all custom. And I designed them all in Photoshop. Nice. The robber piece is Gollum. And all the player pieces, it's Gondor and the dwarves.
Dude, this is awesome.
And all of these are like different areas in Middle-earth.
That's awesome.
Ooh.
How was Steve? Minas Tirith?
This is not an enthusiastic reaction. Why bother?
Whoa, that's amazing!
Welcome back to the channel. Look at this. Look at this reaction. We cured his blindness.
That looks awesome.
Yeah. Yeah, it's all for you, man.
Oh, it's actually mine?
Yeah, but that was the point. Why? What do you mean? It's your
Oh, I thought you
birthday.
were joking. I thought you were saying, oh, it's...
No, it's yours.
Wow.
I remember I said I'd make you a Catan set like 2 years
Yes, I thought you forgot about that.
No, it's just been 2 years, and now here it is.
Dude, that's awesome.
Yeah, then this is yours.
Wow.
Why?
Super cool.
So let's play. Let's play.
Let's play.
This has been a considerably rewarding and yet incredibly daunting undertaking that has really pushed me to learn a lot of things about crafting and really rekindled my love for making overly elaborate gaming projects, as if I'm paying tribute in my own way and saying thanks to all the years filled with laughter that tabletop gaming has provided me. But I think it's more than just fun and games. Board games for me have always been a way that I can connect and communicate with my friends and family. My dad and I played loads of board games together, partially because neither of us were good at communicating or bonding in some other fashion. But these silly games provided me a way to connect with my dad before he passed away, allowing us to bond with more than just a simple exchange of words. And for that, I will always be deeply indebted to gaming. And I feel that same bond now between myself and the friends I game with. Mark was there in the beginning with me, exploring this insane, new, and fairly pricey for poor students hobby. When we lived together, we played Catan for hours on end, all cramped up in this tiny room of our place, playing on some cheap table and chairs. And although it might be cool now to hate on Catan, it certainly provided that gateway to this hobby that we love, and so for that, I am deeply thankful to the game, and I'm so happy I was able to do it justice with this set that acted as the perfect gift for my best friend on his 40th birthday. And eventually, I'll be moving out west with Kim to start a family and create new little gamers, which unfortunately means leaving Mark and all my friends behind here. But you know what? As sad as that may seem, it's gonna be okay, because board gaming will continue keeping us together, even if those games will have to be played virtually. Because board gaming is more than cardboard tokens and wooden meeples, or in this case, overly elaborate Catan sets. For myself and perhaps many of you, it's part of the glue that binds relationships and allows us to tell amazing stories together that we get to share. And those are the things, no matter what the distance is, that we'll always have.
For the quest is achieved, and now all is over. I am glad you are here with me, here at the end of all things.